It seems as though both sides are digging in their heels in what seems to be a slow simmering civil war. It's been brewing in Ukraine the past 15 months. Moscow-backed rebels now accusing government forces of killing 3 civilians in attacks launched hours before the start of talks here in Paris. Last month saw the worst flare-up of fighting since the start of year ceasefire accord in Minsk. So what can they agree upon here in the French capital, especially with the talks coming one day after the EU officially agreed to roll over sanctions against Moscow and, as the US Defense Secretary promises more muscle for Russia's neighbours in the Baltics and Eastern Europe? Is it all posturing, or are we sleepwalking into something more serious? Today in the France 24 debate, Ukraine, the impasse. And with us to talk about it is Dmitry Dekochko, who is a journalist, and thank you for being with us. Also with us, he's a political scientist who teaches at the University of Versailles. Welcome back, Julien Théron. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. 60 civilians and soldiers killed this month in eastern Ukraine. That's according to the government in Kiev.
Yeah, it's a lot, and it's a sign that the Minsk II agreements are not quite implemented over there. There's two sides of those agreements, and it's very important to understand that to implement the political side, which is very needed over there, we have to implement the security side of it. And the continuation of battles actually prevents the implementation of the political side, so it's a real trouble.
Real trouble, and at the same time, we had our correspondent Gulliver Cragg telling us that, well, both sides are digging in, they're arming, they're preparing their weaponry. It seems as though there's going to be a lot of fighting this summer, the way things are going. Yes,
one of the points of those agreements were that the heavy weapons were supposed to be brought out from the front line, and now we just discovered that they both use a heavy weaponry, one against the other. And it's a real trouble because the population on the ground has to deal with the main issues like humanitarian issues. So there's troubles regarding to that.
So
and they receive also all the bombardments, I mean, from the Ukrainian forces, unhappily. That is because yes, the ceasefire is broken, of course, but well, it has been a little implemented compared to what was existing before.
So the fighting's not as bad as it was before February.
Sorry, yeah, but the problem now is of course the political side of the agreement.
And this is where
which Kiev says doesn't want to implement. Poroshenko wants a little, but many other people do not want. And they say it.
Poroshenko said that he would like. I think.
Yeah, Poroshenko, yes.
Yeah.
But
in Donetsk, the so-called prime minister said that actually he did not believe in Minsk II.
All right, and yet this is what's confusing to us. We're talking about a situation where both sides are digging in, yet there are talks going on, talks here in Paris,
in fact,
and also in Minsk, where Poroshenko has sent a special envoy. There he'll be talking with separatist negotiators from those separatist-held towns of Lugansk and Donetsk.
Of course, it will. You know, one of the sides of this Minsk agreement too is a constitutional, in fact, revision or a new constitution, which I think should have been done just after the coup of February last year. Well, it has not been done, so now they have to discuss that anyway. Well, after a revolution, if you call that a revolution, you have to change the constitution. It's always like that.
You're talking about the ouster of Yanukovych after those street protests. You're calling it a coup?
Yes, it is a coup. Well, it's not legal
The
anyway.
question of the constitution is dramatically important indeed, because there's two solutions, and I think that's why they disagree on that. There's the possibility of decentralization, giving more powers to the so-called DPR and LPR, Donetsk and Luhansk Popular Republics. And the other side, it's a federalization of the country. So it does not seem very clear, but the difference between the both is that in the first case, Kiev delegates some power to those entities, that it already recognized in a way as autonomous with the Minsk II agreements. And the other side is to create a federation, meaning that those two entities might have actually a kind of blockade power, a veto power on the decision of the center. So the first one, Kiev wants to implement it, and the second one is backed by the rebels.
Is it a bit of a, I don't know, a parallel universe, the fact that you have this fighting going on on a daily basis, and yet they're sitting down in Minsk?
It started actually just right after the agreements in the city of Debaltseve, which was a part of the government-sized, not sized, but controlled territory. And actually just after the agreements, there was a major offensive by the rebels that just took the city from the government. And we see now that there's fighting from both sides, actually, because
well, in fact, they were besieged there. The army was besieged in Debaltsevo, and the problem of Debaltsevo is that it is a junction by the railway between Lugansk and Donetsk. And in Minsk,
But it was supposed to be a ceasefire.
It was supposed to be a ceasefire, but it was also discussed about the regulation of this Debaltsevo pocket.
Oh, no, it was very clear in the Minsk II agreements. It was regarding to the front line of September 2015.
Yeah, well, anyway, they couldn't leave the Debaltsevo pocket like that, because who would have fed the army, the Ukrainian army, which was
so are you suggesting
there.
This is a humanitarian gesture on the part of the separatists?
It is fight, but it has just finished a few days after the agreement, the Minsk agreement. Then both sides have taken away their heavy equipment. That is true. In the beginning, it has been much quieter and happily for the population. But afterwards, it has come back.
You talked about a very interesting point, which is these double sides of talks, meaning that Sergei Lavrov is speaking for the separatists in Paris, and there's also the negotiation between Russia and the separatists, because Russia always said, like, we are not a part of the conflict, a political part of the conflict. He quite agreed that there is some Russian fighters over there, but it says that they are in holidays and they are not ordered to go there. But he says we are not a political part of the conflict. So even though if they represent them, then there's also the talk with the separatists. That might be a slightly different view, actually. So we don't have to forget that there might be a difference between that as well.
They don't say they are not a political part of the conflict. They are a political part of the conflict. They are not a military part of the conflict. And of course, as I was saying about
do you believe them when they say that?
Yes, of course, like the General Christian Gomard, who has said that in front of the National Assembly in France, on the commission, on the French Defense Commission, he has declared that there were no Russian army in eastern Ukraine fighting against Ukraine.
But Russia said that.
Of course, unhappily, the French press hasn't taken that. But it is on the side of the National Assembly, French National Assembly. Christian Gomard is the general which is in charge of the intelligence of the army. It is not so bad.
It's not the representing all the position of the army, but what is important is that...
You can read that.
Yeah, I know. But what is important is...
The main thing is that in the Constitution, yes, the insurgents should be a part of negotiation about the new Constitution, and they are not.
But they say that
Russia
says that they don't represent the rebels. It's what I wanted to say. But regarding to Crimea, for instance, Russia said as well that it was not the Russian army before actually the President Putin said, like, of course it was us.
Isn't it a bit of a semantic exercise to say the Russian army is not involved when there are Russian soldiers, albeit not officially with the Russian army, and a lot of heavy weaponry provided by Moscow?
No, not at the level of an army. Yes, there are Russian soldiers. Yes, they help with weaponry. Yes, not as much as it is said here, but of course they help, and of course they are not neutral. Of course they support.
But in the Budapest memorandum, it was specified that they recognize the stability and the territorial integrity of the border.
Yes, and insurgents are for independence. and Russia doesn't want this independence. That is one of the big differences.
It's what I thought, but I'm not completely sure, because this week an MP from United Russia, the party of the president, Putin president, said that if the Minsk II fails, that they might actually, Russia might actually come back from the official declaration starting the agreement, saying that Russia does not want to imply itself militarily inside the conflict. So I'm not sure if it's an official gesture or if it's just an MP trying to get some attention, but it might be a sign that actually if the agreement fails, well, there might be a bigger move from Moscow over there.
But you know, there are different trends in Russia and in the political personal trend of Russia. Contrary to what is said here, it is not a dictatorship. And you have a lot of people who are in favor of the United States in Russia and others who are against and who find that Putin is too much moderate and too much centrist. And they feel that Russia should have intervened in eastern Ukraine, and it has not. And they think it is a big mistake for Russia.
All right, so certainly we can hear what the official line is, because as all these talks take place, there's been the rollover on Monday of EU sanctions, the Russians blasting the decision, pointing out that they were approved on the anniversary of the day the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union.
We are disappointed that the anti-Russian lobby took the upper hand again in the EU, pushing through the decision on extending illegal sanctions. On top of that, Brussels intentionally keeps silent about the fact that thousands, even millions of Europeans will lose their jobs as a result of the sanctions.
His muscle, Ashton Carter visiting a cyber defense center in Estonia after announcing the pre-positioning of heavy weapons, including tanks, infantry fighting vehicles and artillery in the Baltics and eastern Ukraine. Now, the day before in Germany, Carter vowing to, quote, stand up to Russia's actions and their attempts to re-establish a Soviet-era sphere of influence.
The answer, of course, is that we will do so together, as we always have. But the Cold War playbook doesn't apply to this future. Our new playbook takes the lessons of history and leverages our alliance's strengths in new ways for these new threats. We will use small footprint, high impact rotational presence, build partner capacity, integrate planning between cyber, space, and conventional forces.
All right, he talks about building partner capacity, and yet it's the United States that's announcing this pre-positioning of artillery and weaponry.
Yes, the EU is at the spearhead, if I can say so, of the diplomatic negotiation. And on the side, the US actually reassure the NATO allies, which are Poland, for instance, or the Baltic states, that they won't be invaded by Russia, with pre-positioning and doing some exercises, military exercises over there. But there's another step that we have not seen, which is the fact that the US Senate actually overpassed the decision of the Obama administration to give just non-lethal aid to Ukraine. And the US Senate thinks about giving some weapons lethal weapons to Ukraine to prevent any contagion of the conflict in other parts of the country.
Are we sleepwalking into something that could be quite dangerous?
It is already dangerous, actually. It is dangerous, and everybody is trying to maintain that as a matter of a cold war and not a hot war. Of course, it's already hot for the people of there, but nobody, and I think that Russia is not very fond of the idea of a global fight against NATO, for instance. I think that it's not its idea. I mean, the military balance is still pretty unfavorable to Moscow. So I think that the idea is pretty much centralized on Ukraine, but it might get hotter in Ukraine.
All right, so Julien Théron describing it there as a good cop, bad cop act, with the good cops being Angela Merkel and François Hollande, who sit down to negotiate with the Russians while the U.S. Defense Secretary is in the Baltics.
That the prolongation of the sanctions is a diplomatic step? It's not really discussion. It is the degree zero of negotiation and diplomacy.
Well,
sanctions is completely stupid, and it is against ourselves.
The sanctions
So,
are
of
against
course,
the annexation of Crimea. It's about Crimea.
Well, it's
and
about,
regarding to Crimea,
it's about the Malaysian plane, which we have no proof who had hit it.
It's about the annexation of Crimea.
And then about Crimea is one of the pretexts which has been used anyway. Now, it is very possible.
What are the real reasons?
Of the sanctions?
Yeah.
You have to ask that to your European Union, which is completely... It is sanctions against ourselves again, I tell you. What are the pretexts? It is the Malaysian Boeing, which has been hit down by whom? We don't know.
No, if you read the statement, it's regarding to Crimea, which has been annexed.
Okay, the Crimea. You can make elections in Crimea and the next elections, and you will have candidates for Ukraine under Ukrainian rule, and we will see what will be with the results will be.
Right, but
there is no war. There is no war in Crimea. It is not a justification.
We know that if the war ends in eastern Ukraine, if the guns go silent, that'll be the end of those sanctions.
Well, stop them. Stop them. Ask Kiev to stop bombing the populations, his own populations, Ukrainian populations of the eastern Ukraine, and start to discuss about the political wing of this Minsk II agreement.
Well, for instance,
and that could be much easier.
In those political steps, there's the return of Kiev's control of the border, actually, meaning the border between DPR, LPR, and Russia. And there's no such a step as well, for instance, for now on, I mean. There's still the OSCE that managed to control, well, to see, actually, not control what is going on the border. And they manage, and you can see on the site of the OSCE, that there's trucks, dozens of trucks coming in and out Ukraine and Russia. But it's still not maintained by the Kiev's government. And there's also supposed to be local elections in those two entities regarding to Ukrainian law and constitution. And it's a very important step politically to establish actually a more stabilized situation.
All right, so there's a lot on the agenda in any case, and let's hope that that escalation that we were fearing does not take place any further. Julien Théron, I want to thank you. I want to thank Dimitri Kochko. Thank you. Stay with us because in part 2 of the France 24 debate, we're going to be looking at the United States and the blowback against the Charleston shooting.